One contemporary economic myth is that the cost of living has consistently risen over the last 100 years and has never been higher for most Americans. At first glance, this seems to be true, as the sticker price of most goods and services is higher than it's ever been. One thing we need to take into account there is inflation, of course. But beyond inflation, the reality is that most goods and services have never been cheaper. The way to see this is to think about the cost of goods and services in terms of the amount of labor time it takes to purchase those at the average industrial wage. So for example, when the average industrial wage is low, it takes a lot more labor hours to purchase the average good than it does when the average industrial wage is high. What we discover is the cost of pretty much everything is dramatically cheaper than it was 100 years ago or even a generation ago. For example, in 1920, the average private sector wage was less than $1 an hour, and a 3-pound chicken took about 2.5 hours of labor time to purchase. If we fast forward to the turn of the 21st century, when the average private sector wage was about $12.50 an hour, that same 3-pound chicken took about 14 minutes worth of labor to purchase. If we think about other kinds of examples, in the early 1960s, one could have gone into an appliance store and for $500 bought the top-of-the-line home stereo system. Today, that same $500, you can go into the store and buy 2 new iPods. Not only that, the iPod can carry all of your music with you anywhere you go, whereas the old stereo system had to stay in your home and could only play one thing at a time. More important, if you think about the $500 that someone would have spent to buy that system in the early 1960s, and then convert that over to labor hours, and think about what the same number of labor hours could buy today, what we find out is that can buy a whole variety of electronics products, from LCD TVs to Blu-ray players to home speaker systems to an iPod to a laptop to a digital camera, all of them, and all of them being of much higher quality than before. Some goods are actually more expensive than they used to be, even if we calculate in terms of labor hours. One example of this are cars. Cars actually cost slightly more in terms of labor hours today than they did decades or even almost 100 years ago. But one of the important things to realize here is that what we're buying with our money is not quite the same. Cars early on, of course, were basically 4 wheels, a seat, and an engine. Today, they're safer and they last longer. Today, if you don't get 100,000 miles out of your car, you feel like you've been ripped off. To get 100,000 miles out of a car in 1920 or 1950 was nearly a miracle. So even though cars cost a little bit more in terms of labor hours, what we're getting for them is a lot more. The dramatic fall in the cost of living over the course of the 20th century illustrates perfectly the power of market competition. As firms compete for consumer dollars, they have the incentive to come out with new and better products that are continually cheaper. Firms have the incentive to innovate, to find more efficient ways to make those products, and to make them available to more Americans. The result of all this is that poor Americans today have more standard household appliances in their homes, such as microwaves, refrigerators, freezers, air conditioners, even cars, than did the average American family a generation ago. So clearly, over the course of the 20th century, the cost of living has fallen as most goods and services are cheaper in terms of the labor time it takes to purchase them, and as a result, all Americans, poor, middle class, as well as upper class, are living better than ever before.